thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Hi, Sifu Mimi. Such a pleasure to be on with you.
Oh my goodness. Well, we've been talking about doing this for a while now, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. And, we were kind of talking a little bit off air, and, being that you were in the Secret Service, I do understand maybe there's things that are secret and that you can't talk about. So you just kind of let me know when that happens. But I'm very excited because I've never actually met anyone that was in the Secret Service, and I've never spoken to anybody.
Oh, wow,
so
really?
Okay. So you're gonna be my full education on it.
Oh, I'll try my best. I hope I don't bore your listeners.
Not at all. Not at all. Just to give our listeners a little bit of a background on you, I know you because your son is a student of mine at my school, and he came in to learn some traditional kung fu because you also have a background in traditional kung fu, and I think it's something that you were kind of looking for, and he's been with us for quite a few years now, so it's been nice.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of that. I don't think you really know how much of an impact you and your family and your school has had on my son, because he just comes home and he never complains when it's class time. And so I'm very appreciative, especially since he goes to a public school.
Okay.
And he's exposed to so much negative influences. So I see Wallam as almost like a buffer, and I'm so grateful that your team, your family, your school has just been such a positive influence on him.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your martial background before we get into the Secret Service stuff.
Okay.
I think it's, I always think it's wonderful when, parents kind of have more of an idea of what traditional Kung Fu is. And I know that you studied as well. I believe, was it in New York or?
Yeah, I was in New York. Although I can't consider myself a martial artist like yourself. I dabbled in it a little, but it's actually a very interesting story. Started off, my dad actually had a friend who did White Crane in New York. And so I dabbled in that very briefly and didn't really like it. But here's the interesting story of how I got into my second style. So I was working security at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, working my way through college. And I guess I got friendly with one of the ladies in the education department. And she was like a former dancer who, I don't know what kind of dance she was doing, but she apparently introduced me to this older Chinese gentleman. This sounds straight like almost like a movie almost.
Right. So straight out of Central Casting.
Exactly. It's very nondescript, small, not muscular, Chinese gentleman in his 60s, I believe, at the time. So we got to talking, and then she found out that, I had a little interest in martial arts. So she said, "Hey, why don't you come to our studio? Just check it out." And why not? So
you're very laid back, easygoing.
Exactly. So we go to this nondescript studio in New York on Broome Street. Like, again, straight out of a movie. It's like all dark, it's all secretive. You open the door and you walk into the studio. So long story short, he was a Sifu of White Eyebrow. And what I didn't know at the time was he was actually a disciple of the famous Zheng Lai Jun. And I didn't know any better. So I decided to, I'll join. $75 a month, Tuesday and Thursdays for a couple hours. But I was totally clueless as to the caliber of martial artist he was. And so basically dabbled for a few years. Looking back, I just totally regret not, getting deeper into it, because he had some pretty substantive knowledge to pass on, which unfortunately passed away. And I was never the recipient of that.
Oh, well, your life certainly took you in other directions. But, as of course, a Kung Fu Sifu and a martial arts practitioner, it's kind of like I always find, though, that anybody who has had, a brush with it or has studied, there's so many principles that kind of stay with you and you take it with you. And that's the goal, of course, when I teach, it's that, those philosophies and something in there sticks. And I'm sure that somewhere in there that martial training and that background definitely helped you with a lot of the work that you were going to continue on to do. And so I read your very, very cool bio. And by the way, for our listeners, make sure you go to our blog site to check out these very official photos of Al on the job. It's like that's to me straight out of a movie. I loved them, by the way. I have to tell you, you look
I'm glad you
so official on the job.
I wasn't sure what kind of photos you want. But yeah,
they're awesome. They're so legit and awesome. But you started off in law enforcement as a probation officer, and clearly you were working security. Like you said, you always kind of had a draw to that line of work. So, I mean, what was it about that kind of interested you? And, how did you kind of get started?
Yeah. So, well, you know how stereotypically my mom wanted me to be an engineer. Right.
Or a doctor or a lawyer would have been maybe second or third.
Exactly. So apparently, I don't know how true this is. My uncle was supposedly this genius engineer, mathematician, electrical engineer. Okay. So the family basically said, okay, you're going to be an engineer. There's no discussion. That's what you're going to do. So okay, I said, okay, that's what I am. And so basically, I didn't do well in engineering school. I went to Northeastern University for 1 year of engineering. And interesting, Dr. Yang Jungming's school was down the block from our university.
Okay, yeah.
So anyway, went to university for 1 year for engineering, hated it, did so poorly that I just dropped out. And as I just tried to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I saw this interview on Charlie Rose. It was this Secret Service agent that was being interviewed, and he was coming out with a book or something. I said, this is kind of interesting. Let me check this out a little bit more, and started researching the agency a little bit more, and said, hey, this is a pretty cool agency with a really impressive organizational culture, sense of values, very small. So I said, you know what, let me embark on this journey to be a Secret Service agent. And so back in the day, you couldn't just join. You would have to have some kind of work experience. So went off and became a federal probation officer to kind of like bolster my resume.
I see.
3 years of that. Didn't really enjoy it, but I need to have that on my resume to be a little bit more competitive to be a Secret Service agent. So
I see.
That's what I did.
Yeah. And I'm dying to get to the meat of that type of work. But as a probation officer, I know that I have actually met and spoken to other probation officers in the past. And there's always kind of a lot of stories, even in that career, that are often just kind of that stick with you. Are there any that come out in your mind that kind of like maybe prepared you for your future work, or that were just kind of like, that's when you knew, like, I didn't enjoy this? Perhaps.
It was tough. I spent maybe a year and a half in pre-sentence investigations, where all I did was pre-sentence reports for federal judges. Okay. And that was pretty brutal. It's like, if you can imagine doing a never-ending term paper, that's essentially what it was.
That sounds
constantly
horrible.
Writing reports with strict deadlines. So I decided, like, let me try something else, like do the traditional supervisory, probation officer, which I did a year and a half of that. That was brutal too. It was just a caseload of 75 plus probationers / parolees.
Okay.
And really, really kind of burnt me out fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So I knew I didn't want to stay there for too long. So as soon as I thought I was able to bolster my resume, I applied to the Secret Service.
Okay. So tell me what that application process is like.
Oh, at least during my time, it was a very long process. We had tons and tons of applications to fill out. You had to tell them, or disclose is like the word they like to use, disclose like where you were born, where your relatives are born, whether you've had foreign contacts, or whether you have regular foreign contacts. And then it's almost like a government application on top of a resume, on top of a cover letter. And then once you get past that initial stage, you'd have to take what was known back then as the Treasury Enforcement Agent examination. So basically, it's like a mini, not as hard as the SAT, but it's like a mini SAT. They throw math at you and do word problems and stuff like that.
Really?
Then,
okay.
Yeah. And then once you get a qualifying score with that, you get invited for an initial interview where a supervisory agent just has like what we're doing now, like a 5-10 minute conversation just to see if you could make a good fit for the agency. And then if you pass that hurdle, then you go on to what's called the panel interview, where you have a supervisory agent and 2 senior agents just, sit before you, and they start firing questions away at you, hypotheticals, and what would you do in this situation, or what would you do here, what you would do. Just I don't want to say they were playing with me, but they were just tossing questions out that were
Can you give me an example of one of the type of questions that they ask? Because I mean, in the prelim, they just kind of check your personality, or they standard interview business questions. But on this panel, it sounds a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I mean, it depended on, well, now it's much more formalized. They have actually set questions where they would ask, but back then it was a lot less stringent. Depends
who you got.
Yeah, exactly. I was like praying I didn't get like a really hard ass. Yeah,
of course.
So I'll pass that stage, and then we went on to the most hated phase that I could think of, the polygraph. Basically, hook you up to the polygraph machine, and they start asking you all sorts of questions, and they try to get you to break, basically. And by the time it's over, you feel like I felt so dirty, and
they make you feel like a criminal.
Yeah, like, I don't know, yeah.
So like when you're doing your polygraph, I mean, are they because I'm only referencing like movies and TV shows, which is probably way off, but they start with like, are you Albert Tim? And, then they progress into like other things like, have you ever stolen or something? Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, I grew up being scared of everything, so I didn't do anything. I mean, they
had no skeletons or criminal paths.
Yeah. They were really grilling me on the drug portion, because they couldn't believe that I never tried marijuana.
And they kept asking you, and they're like,
he's different ways, and like they were like just putting the screws to me, and like, and then because after the polygraph, I think, if I remember correctly, he said, I didn't believe that you didn't try marijuana or something like that.
Right. No, I would also pass that. Yeah. It's funny because I guess they just have kind of like a standard, what they know people the parts they don't quote unquote pass, or the parts that they feel like people are gonna, or not fail at, but I guess that they're gonna have trouble with or something. But when they ask you those questions, are they like, again, I only have one reference, which is what I've seen on TV. Is it like aggressive, or is it just like kind of a calm, like question? It's really up to the individual polygrapher. Okay.
I mean, I felt pretty pressured, but that's just me,
Okay.
So, I mean, it really is the skill of the polygrapher that really can get somebody to confess, or
I see.
But for me, there was nothing for me to confess.
Right. I hated engineering school. I admit it. Okay, Mom, I'm sorry.
The worst, I mean, this is kind of silly, but the worst thing I did in my life that I disclosed was, I may have eaten Japanese noodles the incorrect way.
Oh my gosh.
They They wanted to throw me out of the office. Like, are you kidding me? That's the worst thing you ever did in your life.
So they were like signing you up right away. We're like, okay, this guy is completely like squeaky clean. He's got to get slated. So that's one of the main things you would say, like, is like, if I were coming to you and saying, hey, I want a job in the Secret Service, like, would you say that having a, good moral compass is like one of the big things that they're looking for? Like, that's something that's, one of the big priorities.
Yeah. So I think I don't have the stats, but I think one of the phases where a lot of people wash out is the polygraph phase.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's like certain things that if you fail this part that you're immediately disqualified?
Yeah. So let's see. Foreign connections is a big thing. Like they don't want, because one of the requirements for getting a job is obtaining and holding a top secret clearance. So if there's any inkling that you have any foreign contacts that you're funneling information to, that's a big, that's a big no-no. So, right.
And is that like also personal and business? Like, say you had a family member in XYZ country, that still applies. Is that considered a foreign contact?
Yeah, that's considered a foreign contact. But as long as you disclose it, it's not a big deal. But if you don't disclose it and people seeing you walk out of the Russian embassy or something every other week, it's like, that's kind of like suspicious.
Especially right now.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of suspicious, isn't it? Like, what are you doing over there?
Interestingly, and this is, here we go. I always tangent, but like back in the 80s, we were one of, or the first, to go to the Shaolin Temple as an organization, as a school, as a cultural exchange. And there was a time that my mom and my dad, I believe, got, approached by the FBI as to why they were going to China so frequently. And it wasn't even that frequent. It was like maybe once a year at the most. It wasn't like, every other month or anything. And so, I would say government agencies care about stuff like that. And they are on it, and that's just like a civilian. Right. And so I can imagine trying to maintain, top secret clearance is much more involved.
There is an interesting story I have about this.
Share.
So I forgot what year it was, but I did go back to Hong Kong to pay respects to the Grand Master.
Okay.
Zheng Lijian. And back then, as you know, being a martial artist, White Eyebrow was notorious for having ties to, unsavory characters.
Yes.
So, me being like oblivious, credit to my Sifu. He basically kept me away from all that stuff, knowing that, hey, I was in law enforcement. And then there were a couple of guys in my class who were New York City police officers. So he kept them away from that stuff. But it was interesting. Just being in Hong Kong, he would secretly go to this whatever meeting or reunion and like not invite me and not invite me.
Lunch, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. I felt so slighted until, one of my Hings, like, you idiot. He's trying to protect you.
He's protecting you.
He's protecting you. So you don't have to like say any of this stuff. Like, okay. Let's see how oblivious I am. So that's my little story about reporting foreign connections and stuff like that.
So, okay. Well, and so it's pretty insightful for your Sifu to kind of make that connection and know that way if you weren't there, you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of wish you were there though, right? Now thinking
for
back.
The stories, for just amazing stories. And I'm sure you and your dad have amazing stories, so.
Yeah. But, again, to tangent, because that's what I do, is I was just in New York last year, actually. And I reconnected with a Kung Fu uncle of mine who is Grandmaster Wai Hung of the Fujian Pai. Tiger Claw. Yeah. And he has a lot of stories.
Exactly. Imagine. Right. You know that stuff.
And for our listeners who don't know, he's pretty notorious in New York as kind of like the godfather of Chinatown. And I will say in his senior elderly state still seems to hold that position and is very well respected, revered, maybe maybe even feared a little bit still, but he's much calmer, but he's got a lot of jail and, stories and a lot of things that went down in the 60s and 70s in New York, Chinatown for sure. And it was really nostalgic to sit with him. And I mean, everybody knew where he'd be because I actually hadn't seen him in years and years. He's kind of become stay in his own circle, doesn't really contact people. And they're like, go to Chinatown on Sunday morning, and sure enough, he was there. And, it was actually really nice because I'd like to say this, and I don't know if it's actually true, but I like to say I'm his favorite Kung Fu niece.
I'm pretty sure you are.
I don't know. I will say one of the guys that was hanging out, that's one of his follows him and goes around with Chinatown with him. He's like, he's never gone to dim sum in years. He doesn't and he took you. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if it's me. I think it's more out of respect for my father and the relationship they had. I mean, they had a huge background, but it is really cool to get the old Kung Fu master stories the gang wars and the fights and like the meet me on the basketball court at this park at 2 a.m. kind of thing. Like, yes. Yeah. So unfortunately we don't have any of those from your side, from the Hong Kong, circuit, but they do exist.
That's why I always say we should have had like a bunch of Sifu Mimi clones. And we could have saved a lot of those arcane, Kung Fu styles, somehow. I mean, it's just sad to watch them go by the wayside and all that information lost, all the skills lost, because folks like your dad, the caliber of martial artists, your dad, you're not going to see it. We're not going to see it anymore.
Yeah, no, it is true.
Unfortunately.
It's historic and it's very, very rare. So you're right. It is really rare, but I'm not quite sure I'm sold on the Sifu Mimi clones because I feel like one in this world is quite a lot, but
God, you would have saved so many styles, but like no nonsense. This is what needs to be done.
I appreciate that coming from you.
I had a bunch of us were standing in the middle of New York's Chinatown trying to decide where to celebrate whatever for Sifu, and like none of these guys could make a decision.
That would drive me crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we need to kind of see a Sifu Mimi type, like, let's go. Stop messing around, I wistfully think about what could have been if there was a Sifu Mimi for.
Oh my gosh, you mean someone really bossy? I see where we're going with this.
No, we need somebody like get stuff done.
I appreciate that. I mean, speaking of which, it seems like that's also kind of a characteristic of what a U.S. secret agent would need to have, right? Like, I feel like it's because it's something that you and I talk about, like when we look at the kids and the students, we're like, and then they need to learn to just be decisive, get stuff done, have sense of urgency, all of that. Like, I'd love to kind of go back into what that was like for you as you started that training. Because of course you're already in law enforcement, which comes with a certain level of training and expectation. But how would you say the comparative was from going as a probation officer into something like the Secret Service? What was the I'm all about training. I mean, this is what I enjoy hearing about. But what was the training like?
It was not, I don't want to compare it to special operations or anything like that. I mean, it was challenging, but it was nowhere near what a lot of these military folks do.
Oh, well, I think you're being humble as well. And of course, we don't compare to like, some sort of like, high level special forces, but I mean, clearly there's a lot of responsibility involved. So I'm sure it was rigorous.
Yeah, it was a different mindset because the Secret Service is a dual mission agency. So it has its investigative arm in addition to its more famous, what it's most known for, its protection aspect. So you definitely have to have a certain type of mindset for it. And the hardest part, I think, is really knowing when to be assertive and knowing when to dial back, because you really have to know how to deal with people and get people to do what you want them to do. And you can't just forcefully 100% of the time do that, as especially when you need them and they have all the assets and the logistics that you need. So you have to walk that fine line. So in that respect, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question about how difficult the training was, but you have like the best agents are the ones who know how to kind of manage that. I don't know how you would describe it. You go from being extremely assertive and aggressive, and you dial it back down to being collaborative.
Yeah,
if that's the right word. So it's hard to go up and down the scale, but that's what you have to do if you want to be a really good agent.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, because generally speaking, it's kind of like you want your presence to be known, but at the same time, you kind of are that fly on the wall. Like you shouldn't be like, we all know you're standing here, and like you kind of are moving, not in the shadows. That sounds very mysterious, but essentially it's, I mean, from what I can tell now. So do they work with you on things like that in terms of for the training? Like, is there a physical aspect, and then is there like the psych aspect where they're like going through, like the only thing that I know of with my training with kids and coaching, for example, I'm like, oh, we're going to practice coaching now. All right, you guys are going to get up and teach the class, and let me see how that goes and evaluate you. Do they put you in scenarios and see how you react? Is
that's a great question. They actually do the physical aspects of it. So the shooting part, the control tactics, the so-called interviewing, the actual physical aspects of it, but the more mental aspects, not so much. It's you basically have to learn on the job.
Wow. So based on your initial interview, they feel you'll have the skills or the temperament maybe to pick that up.
Or you get some veteran agent who's willing to kind of take you under his wing.
Okay.
So basically, I learned a lot of my stuff watching these old gritty New York City police detectives, old experienced postal inspectors, and how they would deal with people. And you just kind of put that in your little toolbox, like as you progress through your career. And that's how I learned. And but actually at the academy, I can't say they actually spent a lot of time
saying,
hey, we're gonna teach you how to like deal with people,
right? And you would think, being that that's one of the most important and challenging aspects of the job, that would be kind of this is where I would come in and be like, here's what I think you all need to be doing. Bossy,
I mean, they did do what you said, to put you in scenarios.
Okay.
What they call attack on principles. So it's more like a physical aspect. Like, okay, we're going to hire a bunch of role players, and then we're going to put like a would-be assassin in the crowd, and you're just going to have to like spot him, or if you him or her, or if you don't spot him or her, you're going to have to react to what he or she does.
Right.
So in that respect, they'll put us through scenarios, which tests our physical abilities. But I always thought the mental aspect of it was something that they really didn't address as well as they should have or could have.
Right. No, I mean, that's what I'm hearing, because I'm like, oh, I am a huge contingency type of person. I'm like, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? Let's like make sure we've gone through every scenario, and to overkill, as you know, I'm a little bit OCD, but it does sound like that would be a challenge, especially because you're dealing with so many different people internationally, and just there's so much to learn about that it would be kind of an emphasis point. Did you ever see that go wrongly because basically there wasn't enough emphasis on that type of training? Like, were you in a scenario where it's like one agent or yourself even like, oh, I didn't handle this the way I could have? And
so I think during the during the campaign season where Donald Trump was doing a lot of stops in Orlando, Florida, I had already developed a relationship with a bunch of people up in the Sanford area where he was doing a lot of his rallies. And for some reason, I was on another assignment, and a temp agent from out of district had to come in to do something, and basically his social skills, I guess, were left a lot to be desired, and he just destroyed all the relationships I had made because of the way he was, how he presented himself, how he, you know, how he came up with the security plan, and how he interacted with all the various entities that needed to be, you know, put on board. So, I mean, in that respect, you know, it's sad. You know, you just watch all of the relationships that you made just go down the tube, and then you have to, because I was at one point assigned to the Orlando field office, I had to basically fix things that this person, you know, destroyed.
Yeah. Oh, and that must be really frustrating because there's safety involved, right? It's a matter of that, as well as like just the ease of efficiency of work and all of those different things. And relationships take so long to build, but very quick to destroy. It's interesting.
You're developing relationships with the local police departments, the local population, the local in Sanford, they have their own little airport authority that they have. So yeah, I mean, it can get frustrating when you take so much time to develop those relationships, and it goes away overnight because this person couldn't figure out, or never figure it out, like, hey, this is probably not the way you do this.
Yeah. And you've worked all over. So you've worked in the New York field office, you've worked at headquarters in Washington, and of course, Orlando. Talk to me a little bit about the scope of all the different things that you've had to do in all those various places.
Oh, okay. So in New York, one of the largest field offices for the Secret Service, typically when an agent starts his or her career, we spend anywhere between depending on the needs of the agency, we spend anywhere between 6 to 7 years in our first field office, where we engage in criminal investigations, which involve investigating counterfeiting, credit card fraud, bank fraud. And then if we're not doing that, we also investigate threats directed toward the president, vice president, and anybody who we might protect. So in that respect, we when we're in our field office assignments, we're doing all of those types of investigations. And then after that period is over, we are given the option of relocating to Washington, D.C., where we do what we're known for, protection, full time. So in my case, I was selected to go on the vice president's detail. So basically, I was doing protection 24/7. And we do that for maybe 4 years. And then we kind of transition either back to the field and do criminal investigations again, or we transition to our headquarters divisions, where we kind of, I guess, add to our resume and bid for promotions.
I see. So, okay, when you're on detail of like vice presidency, so that's like what we see in the Line of Fire, right? Where you're following them around, you're like, you're like making sure there's no assassins in the crowd. That's like kind of what people think of when they think of a Secret Service agent, right? That's like kind of your typical role, I guess you could say.
That's what everybody thinks of when
they think of Secret.
Clint Eastwood running along,
Yeah, hence your photos. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. It's straight out of a movie. I love it. But I mean, it sounds like the entire scope of the job is so wide that there's so much more to that. Would you say, though, that being on the detail like that, like protecting, is more stressful than other aspects of the job? Like, where does that lie in what you consider to be like the ranks of promotion? Is that a very high end type of position? Or
protection is physically grinding and emotionally grinding, because you're changing shifts almost every 2 weeks. So because we provide protection 24/7 to our folks, you always have to have somebody on duty. So you have, what we used to do, we would have 2 weeks where our agents would be on day shifts, and then we rotate into the next 2 weeks, which is the afternoon shifts. And then after that, we rotate into my most hated shift, the midnight shift, where you come in at midnight and you do like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning. There's physically grinding. And then, once it's a constant rotation of shifts, and that really does a number on your body, your sleep schedules, and you can never plan on anything. I miss so many birthdays, I miss so many holidays. So it's physically grinding compared to field office work, where it's more of a traditional, 9 to 5 type, even though it's not really 9 to 5.
Right.
But it's less physically demanding in the field than, say, if you're doing protection full time.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
And that also depends on the person you're protecting. So if you have somebody who likes to travel a lot,
okay,
then you're always tired. Versus if you have somebody who doesn't like to travel, then you're basically like always kind of, you're always chilling somewhere.
So that's
for example, So for example, Melania Trump was notorious for not wanting to travel at all. So the agents on her detail would really not be doing much.
They're like hanging out.
Yeah. So she would always be, inside, doing her thing, doing whatever she's doing,
Right. Which as a Secret Service, it's kind of a nice thing, I guess you could say, because the threat level's lower because you're not out in crowds, you're not out in the public as much. Whereas I know you did Vice Presidents Cheney and Biden, who I'm sure were, from my recollection anyway, there was always events and always things happening. The scope of the job was that they had to be out and about, right? And so that must have been pretty intense for you.
Yeah, for sometimes it was. Sometimes I mean, Vice President Cheney traveled, but not as much as Vice President Biden. So yeah, it was pretty grueling when Vice President Biden was in office.
I see.
Let's see. I can't remember how many places I went, but yeah, it was a lot of places.
Do you also travel internationally?
Yes. So I did go to South Africa with President Biden. I think Nigeria.
And when you go to these places, do you ever get like downtime? Like, I'm going to go take the day to tour, tour things, or is it strictly business?
No, actually, there is some downtime. So
there is. Okay.
A lot of people enjoy those international trips because
they get them
on their off shift. They get to either sightsee or whatever. Luckily, if they spend a lot of time in country, if it's one of those in and out type of trips, there's not a whole lot of sightseeing to do unless you want to forego sleep. And
which I'm guessing you didn't or don't.
No, I really like my sleep.
I felt that about you. I just
really
kind of felt that
sleep.
you're kind of routine and you enjoy your sleep. But I mean, and also to function well on the job.
Yeah,
it's kind of necessary.
Yeah. I still get criticized. I think we were in Moscow, and I think I slept through most of that trip. I think my friends wanted to go to Red Square or something. I said, nah, I need to go. I need to go to sleep.
I love that. And did you get to fly like on Air Force One or on the special planes, or do you guys have to fly
Air Force Two?
Air Force Two, right? Of course. Sorry, yeah.
And it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's not like flying commercial. You get a lot of leg room. Get a lot of leg room.
Right. You can walk around.
Although we did have to pay for our meals. The Air Force charged us,
really?
however amount for the food. But I thought they would give it to us on the arm, but no.
How was the food?
Actually, not too bad. Especially when you're
very
hungry.
Interested in food, so
especially. I'm a foodie too. I love.
That's right. You cook as well. We could talk about that.
I try.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know. Your family says they're really happy you're home because you're cooking all the time. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't look good, but it tastes okay.
Well, that's what matters most. Most. But
I heard you're quite the cook, though. I heard you're quite the chef.
I am. It's my OCD. Everything I do has to be to the nth degree.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yes. So we'll have to dine together one day, and then we can do our foodie thing. We'll have a lunch. But were there, I mean, and again, I know that maybe you wouldn't even be allowed to disclose, were there times on your protective service detail with the vice presidents that you did have to like apprehend someone in the crowd that was suspicious, or were there like not assassination attempts necessarily, or were there, but were there things that were kind of your training had to kick in?
Nothing to that degree, but if you remember the photo that I had sent you, that was our trip to Fort Hood. And he was doing a speech there. And after his speech, we do what's normally called a rope line. So basically he walks to the crowd and he starts, shaking hands. And thankfully nothing happened. But as we were doing the rope line, most people, they're happy. They're reaching their hands out. They're showing you your hands, so they know they're not a threat. And they're happy. They're saying, hello, Mr. Vice President, this and that. And then you come across this one dude with this like blank dead eyes. And you go, oh, really?
That's what's going through your mind, really? Oh my gosh. I think you're probably the chillest Secret Service agent.
But as you can see, like we try to wear our glasses, our sunglasses. And so interestingly, and I'm not saying we do this deliberately, but it's almost as if you want them to think that you're actually staring at them, even though you may not be. But in this case, I was. I mean, hopefully, once they get a sense that somebody's onto them or whatever. I'm not saying that this person had a weapon by any means, because it was a mag crowd, but you never know. So we did the rope line and come across this one person that with those dead eyes, and you go like, oh, man, like what's his deal, And you just pray as you're finishing the rope line, like, okay, like he just stays put and nothing happens. So that's one of the few times where you kind of get the the spidey senses.
Yeah,
on the ears. I'm like, oh, like really, like you couldn't pick another day to like show up.
Someone else's shift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, luckily nothing happened, thank God.
Right. But sometimes just that eye contact, or just that notice of like, if they know they're being checked on, like sometimes that prevents things too. Like you just don't even know.
And that's what happened when and that's what happened when they interviewed John Hinckley after he had shot President Reagan. Like he was stalking Jimmy Carter for a while, and I think he decided not to do something because he thought a Secret Service agent had looked him in the eye.
Looking at him. Okay.
So we never know like what.
No, it's true. I mean, and just even having your presence there, right, is a big part of it. Are there usually more Secret Service that aren't visual, like in the crowds and stuff like that are less like I guess kind of undercover? Like, because you all who are doing the detail, it's very clear. You're standing there, you get the earpiece, you get the whole look. Is there usually more stuff going on at things like that?
In the protective bubble, there are all these layers of security. So, at least on the vice presidential and protection level and presidential levels, you have like all these multiple layers of security. So the possibility of like that lone assassin is probably a lot less than if we were on the campaign trail with a nominee who's less well known.
Okay, because there's less layers and less
right, because we don't have obviously the assets, and plus they're not as well. Plus they're not really, well, they are considered protectees of the Secret Service, but it's just so early on in the election cycle that you can't give them like the full complement of assets that we would normally give a vice president or a president.
Right. And, one of the things I find really interesting is that like that's just the job, and you do the job and it doesn't matter who you're protecting. And I always find that fascinating because I try to be very compartmentalized and like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and my personal feelings don't come into play. And, that must really have to be the case for you all, because it essentially you're protecting the office, right? Not the person. Right, is that right? Or
that's correct. That's correct. I mean, I would like, well, let me just preface
Sure.
this by saying any views or opinions expressed by me is strictly my own and not that of the Secret Service.
I love it.
But you're absolutely right. I would like to think that, we don't get emotionally involved in, I like this person, I don't like that person. But you can't help but go, oh, really? So, I mean, for example, during the height of this civil unrest in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
the president decided he was going to do that walk across the street to the church, and I was there.
Yes.
I was there, and like you just think, like, really, like, this is just not a good idea. Like, but again, we're there to protect the president. Like, we can't decide, like, well, this is not a good idea, so I'm not going to do it.
Right.
But it was just after it was all over, you start thinking, like, man, that was not a good decision.
Yeah.
For him to make. It really put us in a bad spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. But what people don't realize, I mean, these folks are, well, I'm not talking about President Trump. I'm just saying the protectees in general are, they're human beings,
Mm-hmm.
They have they have their up days, their down days. I remember when, Vice President Cheney wasn't so popular, and every time we would move him from the vice president's residence to the White House to start his day, you would see, as our motorcade was screaming through D.C., you would see these people with their infants or their toddlers just giving us the finger, giving him the finger. And for some reason, it got under my skin, because, like, really, you're behaving like that in front of your child. Whether you agree or disagree with this person's policies, I mean, anyway. But I say that to say, whether you like him or hate him, I mean, he's just a human being, like all of us. I mean, I actually like the guy. I mean, I like Vice President Biden too. They're all again, they're just human, just like us. They may have different political views, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's just something you couldn't actually function in your job if you weren't able to do that. If you weren't able to say, hey, I'm going to go with this as a human, and whether they're voting or, these policies, et cetera, like, it doesn't really matter what you believe or what your tendencies are. Right. Like, and I would have a huge issue with that. Like, I will give you my small window of, recently I'm working on this AAPI history bill. And of course it didn't go through this year, and we're still going to push through for next year. This is just how it goes. But it's the first time I was in Tallahassee, in the Florida capital. And it was really difficult to have conversations with people that I knew we didn't align with so many other things, knowing that I do have a common goal that I need to get done, and I need these people to be on board with, because they're the House of Representatives and Senators, right? Like, it doesn't get done unless I'm able to make it work. And very difficult, because obviously, listeners, everyone knows I'm very progressive. I have a lot of social justice work that I'm passionate about. And so it's very hard to sit across from someone that is just radically different in their thinking.
Right.
My trick is like trying to find some kind of commonality. And some people, I will be honest, like, the only thing I could find was that we both needed air to function and breathe. Like, it was really coming down to what can I do? But how are you? Is that just your personality? How are you able to do that? So, because literally you are putting your life in danger for someone else, and especially if you don't agree with their values. How does that?
I honestly, I don't think we can really think about that in that way, because if you start thinking like that, then I think about
then you
it.
Have to retire.
Oh, well, maybe I had to retire. Maybe I'll trip or something if something happened. Like, no,
right? You have to stay focused.
Yeah. So
of course,
I would like to think that I was professional enough where, you just kind of put aside those human emotions and just remain apolitical. I hope I was able to do that.
Well, I think so. I just from this conversation, clearly your professionalism is like here and you're able to do that. But I love that you just said human emotions, right? Because it almost makes it sound like in a way you had to be kind of not a robot, but turn a lot of things off in order to function and do the job. Would you say that that is a characteristic of a good agent?
Yeah, I think you have to really maintain that apoliticalness of what we need to do. Because I mean, not our current president, but our previous president, you have to kind of, your eyebrows have to go like I don't know, man.
That must have been tough, because this is very interesting to me that you retired kind of right after all of this, President Trump's presidency. Like, what were those 4 years like? Like you said, you were there when he walked to the church and you knew that wasn't a good thing, but you did your job. I do want to talk to you, of course, about the Capitol on January 6th, because my understanding is you were also up there. And
I didn't for the civil unrest at the church. I wasn't. I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? Yeah, so basically, coming back to being apolitical, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. Like, so a bunch of us were at the White House during the height of the civil unrest, and President Trump decides to make a surprise appearance to our briefing room, where, or basically, I didn't have any direct interactions with the president. Obviously, I wasn't on the detail, but I was in more of a supportive role, as during that time, it was all hands on deck. Riots going on. Like, there's no, hey, it's not my job. So everybody is in. But I say that to say, it was tough, kind of maintaining that, that distance, or the non-emotional aspect of it, because he came into the briefing room, and it was very surreal. It was very surreal. Like, he was there to give all the uniform division officers, all the special agents, like a pep talk, because kudos to the UD officers, because maybe it was a couple of days before, like the rioters had tried to breach the White House, and they held the line, basically. And so that was a horrible night for those folks. And they held the line. There were some real heroes that night. But anyway, he came into the briefing room at the White House, and basically to give a pep talk to everybody. And I couldn't help but notice how surreal it was, because he is the way he is. It was almost like a Saturday Night Live skit. Like, he's just,
so what we see on TV is behind the scenes. That guy is that guy.
There's no. He's not a politician. He's an entertainer. He's an entertainer, that's for sure. And he knows how to push buttons. And whether you like him or not, you gotta tip the hat. Like, he knows how to entertain. So I don't know. But anyway, I thought it was a very surreal event, and it wasn't a good day for our country. And so.
And when you were in that briefing room, and he, like you said, came in to give you all a pep talk, you use the word surreal, because is it because you felt like his tone was that of an entertainer, and did you feel like at that point people were being endangered because of things he said? Or did you feel like, I'd love, if you're able to, like, I'd love for you to be able to kind of articulate more on your side of things. Like, you are all there putting your life on the line, and what that must have been like for you to have kind of been in that environment, and then for him to come in and be like, hey, you guys, we're gonna be fine.
So I mean, he was actually resonating with the folks in the audience. Interestingly, yeah, because he knows how to do that. He just knows how to do that. Again, my opinion.
Yes,
Not,
got it.
this is not the opinion of the Secret Service, or does not
We'll
represent
put
what the
that all over this podcast. I'll put it in writing. It'll be clear. It's just your
yeah,
opinion.
yeah. He knew what to say. Definitely, he knew what to say, and he was resonating with majority of folks. I believe. I mean, not necessarily me, but
right.
but
And the whole like you said on January 6th and everything that was going on, can you kind of talk to a little bit of, like you said, it was all hands on deck, like what was that whole morning like? What were did you get called in? Were you already on service that day? Like what was it like on your side?
I was based at the Department of Homeland Security's headquarters in Washington, D.C., which is the St. Elizabeth's campus, which is near the Washington Nationals baseball stadium. That's where the headquarters was near. But I didn't have any direct involvement with the January 6th insurrection or any dealings with that. But they did call us in where we were all geared up, ready to support, the Capitol Police. So I remember that day fairly vividly. I had a meeting with a bunch of people, and then literally on my way home, and just got the phone call and said, "Hey, get all your stuff, report back to headquarters, and stand by to go to the Capitol to assist the officers." And thankfully, they pretty much got everything under control by nighttime with the National Guard, and we were still on standby, all geared up with our police markings and this other stuff. And but so that's the extent of my involvement in the
But I mean, being on standby and being like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind, or are you that again, just kind of focused on like, here's my task? I mean, literally knowing also you're like, I'm about to be retired. Like, why am I here right now?
Yeah, it was bizarre because during the civil unrest, you have rioters on one side of the spectrum, just screaming all sorts of vile names at you, throwing stuff at you, et cetera, et cetera. And then now January 6th insurrection, you're going on the other side of the spectrum where they're you see them just disrespecting law enforcement, and you just can't make this stuff up. Like is this, you have to ask yourself, is this world gone crazy? So wasn't in danger the way a lot of these Capitol Police officers were,
of course,
but I don't know, we were all standing by to support our brethren there.
Yeah, of course. And looking back at that day, and it'll be the last question about this, but looking back at that day, I mean, do you really feel like it has gotten the fair attention to the severity and to the level of, like you said, it was such a sad day, and for someone who's literally dedicated over 20 years to law enforcement and protecting the United States office of, the president, vice president, et cetera. Like, do you really feel like, I just feel, in my opinion, I feel like it's been minimized as to what that really meant for our country and how sad that was for our country. But I'd like your opinion as somebody on the other side of things that has been putting their life on the line, literally, to keep our democracy and our country safe, and the people who run our country safe. Like, what are your thoughts on like how this has been perceived by others, or the whole thing?
I think you're absolutely right. I it's just bizarre to me how it's not, depending on who you ask. you get a different answer. That to me, that's just bizarre. I mean, everybody knows what happened. Everybody could see what happened. So it goes back to when you went to the state capitol, and you don't understand how you can be so diametrically opposed. I mean, my experience with politicians, they're probably, like, I don't want to overgeneralize, but in general, they're probably some of the most disingenuous people that you'll ever meet. Again, my opinion. So if I would venture to say, if there was something in it for one of those folks at the state legislature, they probably would have placed, the AIPI bill or pushed it forward a little bit, but there was nothing in it for him. So this is what I'm thinking. But the same thing with our federal government. Like if there's nothing in it for, you would think they're supposed to represent, their constituents, but in reality, I think you'd have to say that. Again, I always tell Alec, my 12-year-old son, like, if you want to judge somebody, just judge them by what they do and not what they say. Just watch what they do, and then you'll see where their heart truly is. And don't listen to what they say, because everybody's going to say, wow, I really believe in whatever, fill in the blank issue. But you watch what they do, and okay, I see where your heart is. You're not really into this. So so that was just bizarre. And to this day, it still baffles me how you have an entire contingent of our government just minimize or just don't want to talk about how serious.
Yeah, because it could certainly happen again if we don't condemn it and make sure that it's really clear that was not okay, and that there should be consequences to those actions. I don't want to.
It's pretty cool that Liz Cheney, was one of those few that stepped out, because I did my time.
You know her, right?
I don't know her personally, but I did my time protecting her and her family in DC, Virginia. So she is a very nice lady.
Yeah. And again, that is something where I can be this is where I can say, I'm not necessarily politically aligned, but I completely respect the fact that she could stand alone in a sea of people that are just, just condemning her for her thoughts and what I believe to be standing up for democracy and for what's right. Like,
it's pretty wild, right?
It's wild. I never thought there would be a day that, we're standing on the same side of the line of what we feel is right and wrong on things. Cause, we definitely disagree on other stuff, and I think that's fine. And like you said, they could be very nice and people are still human, but I just feel like what happened then, we really should not be forgetting, because I feel like it's just like why I want AAPI history to be learned, because we're having attacks on Asian Americans daily, people getting beat up or killed. And it's like, hey, let's fast forward. Let's rewind to history and realize that this has happened before and it will happen again if we don't learn from it. And I think this is something in history that if we don't make it historical and something to be learned from, and we try to brush it under the rug, it could be serious issues. So, thank you for sharing all of that. Because you are retired now, congratulations.
Thank you, Simon.
It must be like you get to sleep on your own time. You have a good routine now. You're happy and super relaxed. But do you find that, like, you've come around to Chinese New Year with us, and, some of the instructors are always teasing, there's Mr. Tam. He's probably doing security detail for us, but we just don't know it. And do you find it like, are you just totally unplugged, or are all those is all of that programmed in you for so long that anywhere you are, you're scoping out areas and you're kind of always have like kind of that awareness?
That's an interesting question. I never really thought about that. I think maybe on a subconscious level, I may be, because, when you guys are performing, I'm basically looking for somebody on the outer perimeter that may be coming at you. I'm trying to intercept them before they get to you.
So you are doing our detail.
I don't know if I do it consciously, but it's almost like, hey, these, the Wallam family is vulnerable here. So let me just walk over here.
I love it. So, it is hard to turn it off though, right?
Yeah, for the most part. But since I've retired, like, I focused on really trying to do for Alec, only because the educational system here. It leaves a lot to be desired.
Yes.
A lot of gaps that I'm trying to fill. So a lot of what I'm trying to fill, a lot of my time is spent trying to fill the gaps for, Alex's education.
Yeah,
Which
that's
I'm not even
unfortunate.
like a professional educator, so I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to fill the gaps.
No, I actually think from what you shared today, the advice you're giving him is the education that he needs. That's a whole nother conversation. My thoughts on the school system and, the ability for kids to be able to take tests. That's what they leave school with, but they can't think on their own or answer a question. Exactly. And that's at my school. Like, I'm like, yes, we teach Kung Fu, but I really want these kids to not shrug their shoulders when they're asked a question. I want them to critically think. I want them to have opinions and not be afraid to get the wrong answer. Like, I feel like it's very backwards, but that goes into a whole nother thing. So I'm sure you're doing a fantastic job, because being here and supporting and you're not missing birthdays and all of that. And I know that that's been, there's a sacrifice, right? To that type of life. There's a sacrifice to the career that you had. And the fact that, not to harp on my least favorite president in person, but like the fact that there is so little thought in putting other people's life in danger, just like, well, that's their job. I'm like, but they are also humans with families and other people, and that it was given so little consideration. Those are the things that I see, right? Let alone the political side of things, but just things like that. Like you said, it's like, hey, we're all at risk here, and like you said, judging people by their actions and not their words is kind of what's important.
Yeah. And again, thank you so much for doing what you do. My son, definitely resonating with my son, and he's going to be better for it.
I hope
he's already planned his future out based on wanting to be in proximity to, your school, to you.
I appreciate that. That is very, very kind.
Okay.
Well, so that's great, because if it keeps our personal Secret Service detail around, then, it's a win-win. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share kind of about that line of work, maybe stereotypes about it, or anything that you think that would be interesting for our listeners to learn before we wrap up?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't think so. So. Unless you want to hear another story.
Sure. You got another story in there?
I don't know. I'm trying to think if it's even a story or more of a. I'll just say it out loud.
Go for it.
There's nothing secret about it. It's just to show you how human our protectees are, and I'm a first-time parent. So Vice President Biden, he's known to be a family man. Whether you like his policies, don't like his policies, think he's doing a good job, you don't think he's doing a good job. Again, he's human. And I took some of what he did with his, the way he raised his kids and grandkids, and I integrated it into, my son when I'm taking care of my son. So basically, this is the gist of it. So for him, his thing was, anytime somebody like a child, son, grandson comes to him or wants his attention, you drop what you do and you just pay attention to them. So I adopted that and I integrated it into how I raise Alec, and it's worked out fairly well so far. But it just goes to show you, like, all these protectees that we were involved in, they're humans, and they have their pluses and minuses, and to me, it's not good or bad. It's just they're just human. Same thing with Vice President Cheney. But
nice. I do appreciate that window into a reminder, because I do think it's important, because I could just be angry all day at certain things. And I think it's much better to just kind of embrace humanity and focus on the positive stuff. So I appreciate that aspect of it. Because I know that I can tend to get very, very frustrated. And that reminder that we are all human and that we all do want the same things in life is to protect our families, to be happy and, to thrive and everything, I think is an important lesson. So, Al, I really appreciate your time today. And maybe you'll come back and share more stories with me.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun. And I'm sure I didn't get to counterfeiting and cybercrime. So I don't know how exciting that is, but we'll hear like Not so much.
wasn't my forte in the service.
All good. All good. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.